don't want to lose any of this valuable information, and kick us off. So the topic for today is the health harms and environmental injustice of oil and gas drilling, and how we can work together to prevent more oil drilling on our public lands in this Golden State, which is perhaps not shockingly an effort that's underway. So if you could write your name in the chat, if it's not, or name yourself, so everybody can see who you are, and if you want to put where you're joining from, that's always fun too. So a brief overview, and then I'll pass it to Bill to kick us off. Is we're going to speak briefly about the Bureau of Land Management Environmental Impact Review process, and why it's important and what the stakes are if it moves forward. We'll talk a little bit, Dr. Allshouse will talk about the health harms of oil and gas drilling. Dr. Gonzalez will talk about the regional impacts of Bureau of Oil and Gas drilling, and potential impact on disasters like fires, and how that's important. Then we will finish speaking about some of the resources that we can look to kind of contribute to the BLM process for why we don't want more drilling. Then we'll have some time for discussion, and then we'll finish off talking about how to get involved if this is something that you care about, which we hope you do. Obviously, you're spending your precious time with us. How to collaborate in opposing this terrible idea. So I'll pass it. Oh, and then our purpose, as most things with climate health now, our purpose is to learn with the goal of engaging as really confident advocates about the harms that oil and gas drilling have for health, for environmental reasons, environmental justice reasons, in the Bureau of Land Management regulatory process that's going to be kind of reopening for public involvement in a couple of weeks. So we want to learn to engage, and that's what we're going to do today. So I'm really excited to introduce our two special guests. We have a special visitor coming in from Colorado, Ben Allshouse, who, let me pull up your exact. So Ben William goes by Ben Allshouse, is an instructor of environmental and occupational health at the Colorado School of Public Health, and has expertise in the spatio-temporal modeling of environmental exposures. And a significant component of his work has focused on unconventional oil and gas development and its potential impact on the public's health. And then here in the East Bay, close to where I live, Dr. Gonzalez is a assistant professor at UC Berkeley in the public health department, whose research focuses on how pollution from extractive industries and climate-driven disasters affect public health. His research also examines the structural factors that contribute to health disparities. And I just learned that yesterday that David has a 1-year-old just like me. So we're really excited to have you both here and to have this conversation. So, but I'm going to pass it to Bill now, who will speak about why this conversation is so important.
So can I share my slides? Do you have my slides?
If you are yours ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So let me stop share, and I'll pass it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then when you're done, Ben, if you could share yours, that would be perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you. It should be projecting now, yes. Okay. So there is a proposal for the Bureau of Land Management, which is a federal agency that controls federally owned public lands in the United States, to open 600,000 acres of California to additional oil and gas drilling. And on this map, so in the red line, are the counties that are included in this proposal. And this is being managed through two separate field offices, the Bakersfield Field Office and the Central Coast Field Office. And the way the process works with the BLM is a resource management plan is drafted. And those plans usually typically cover 20 years. So this tends to be a very long-term commitment once it happens, which is a big part of our concern. Simultaneously, an environmental impact statement needs to be developed, a draft developed. And for this proposal, currently that is due October 24th. Whether that's going to change with the federal shutdown, we don't know, but right now that's due October 24th. That's followed by a 90-day public comment period and at least a single in-person comment opportunity is required. That is tentatively scheduled for sometime in January, although a date for that has not yet been determined. Then after that period, a proposed resource management plan and a final environmental impact statement are produced, which are supposed to address the comments that were received. Those final reports are due February 27th. Once that is released, there is a 30-day protest period, but in order to file a protest, one must have previously participated in the planning process. You must have previously made a comment, or you must show that you will be directly adversely affected by the proposed plan. And then after that, the proposed management plan and final environmental statement are sent to the governor, and the governor is allowed to comment on any inconsistencies in the plan with state and local plans and laws for 60 days. Then after the consideration of those concerns, the Bureau of Land Management state director makes a final decision on whether to approve the final resource management plan. So what we hope to do to try to block this short-sighted and dangerous plan is during October and January to flood the BLM with multiple written comments on the draft environmental impact statement. During that time, we also hope to draft a very comprehensive single comment on the specific health deficiencies that will be identified in that environmental impact statement. We hope to reference specific sections of that draft proposal and use peer-reviewed published references in support of our comments. And then hopefully, once we draft a well-thought-out health response to the environmental statement, get multiple different organizations to sign on. We believe if the laws are followed, that the BLM has to respond to every comment they received. They tend to batch letters that all say the same thing and give one response to that. But if we give them a very specific comment referenced on deficiencies identified in that statement, hopefully they will have to respond to those, and hopefully we can turn this around. And then if we actually submit that, and then we hope to actually send at least one representative to that January in-person meeting to make comments based on our comprehensive written document. And then if they do end up approving this, we hope to then file a protest in February because we will be on the official record of having been involved with the process. So that's what we are proposing to do, and I will stop at this point.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. So we'll pass it to you. Are you able to screen share okay, Ben?
Let's see.
And just while you're pulling it up, our aspiration is to also have a huge showing, perhaps meeting the criteria for rally at said public comment meeting in person this winter. So we'll save more, we'll share more info about that soon, but that's the aspiration.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about unconventional oil and gas development, the pollutants that are produced from it, and then what the literature says on health effects. Finishing with a little bit of the work that we've been doing here in the state of Colorado. So just to kind of start, there's actually quite a few components to the whole oil and gas ecosystem. The upstream part is what we're going to be focusing on today. So that's kind of the drilling and the producing of the oil and gas. And we're not going to be talking about where it goes to be processed and then how it gets into your home. So just first to kind of define what unconventional oil and gas development is. So oil and gas, when you think of it, a lot of people think of kind of this pump jack that's sitting out in the field, maybe a little rusty, but fairly benign. And that's actually, I mean, was kind of the legacy wells and the conventional wells, and we'll talk a little bit about what it means to be unconventional. So those conventional wells, which you can see on the left, is where essentially they're drilling down into this pool of oil and gas, and then they're pumping out that resource. And most of that has been depleted. I mean, you might have seen some of those pump jacks down in Southern California. I think last time when I was in Long Beach, Seal Beach area, I could still see those. But most oil and gas development, at least what we're familiar with here in Colorado and what's being done in Texas, is in the unconventional class. And so there, once they depleted all of those pools of oil and gas, they started using these unconventional methods. And so what that means is rather than going into the pool, they're drilling down and across into the rock that has some oil and gas in it. They're fracturing that rock with water and chemicals at high pressure. That releases the oil and gas, and then it comes back up the well. So that's really allowed the industry to kind of tap into all of these resources that maybe previously weren't economically viable. They've gotten this technology down quite a bit, and they're able to drill out a lot further. Kind of every year they improve how far they can go out. I think the last time I looked, they could do horizontals of, it was almost up to 2 miles.
Whoa.
Sorry,
Ben, could you, I think if you push share, it'll help the image to be bigger. So we can see it. Thank you. I can't believe 2 miles. That's insane.
Sorry, I'm trying to. So is it can you see the whole screen, or can you just see a small version of the image?
I think if you, on the top right, if you push present, then
oh, gotcha. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm looking at a different screen completely. Got you.
Press slideshow.
That'll work.
Did that do it?
It didn't.
It may be on your other screen. May need to share your other screen.
Sorry, just a second here. Let's see. Sure.
There it is. Beautiful. Thank you.
Sorry about that. It's been, I don't know, it's been a little while actually since I've taught via Zoom, so a little rusty. All right. So hopefully that's a little bit better. So they can drill down and across and up to 2 miles. And so what that has done is, since they can now they can concentrate their infrastructure into a single well pad. And so here in Colorado, and I think also what they're doing in many other places across the country, is they're putting not one well on a pad, but they're putting 20, 40, 60 wells on a pad. And they're drilling down and out from that one location. And then that one location has all the wellheads, it has the tanks. That's where they have pipelines and truck traffic. And so they need fewer of these locations, but if you are living near one of them, it's a lot more like an industrial site rather than the pump jack that you might be used to.
Doesn't want to cooperate with going forward.
Great.
Maybe sometimes pressing escape will allow.
It should advance if you just click on the slide.
Yeah, that's what it's advancing on.
I had the similar problem with a PowerPoint on Zoom recently. I don't know. I could never figure it out. I wonder if there's some glitch currently in the Zoom format. I don't know.
Okay, let me, escape out of that. Let me try sharing again. That work?
Yep, we're back. Yep.
Okay, sorry, I think we're good to go now. Okay, so just to give you a sense, there's this pre-production period where they go in and they drill the wells, they do the hydraulic fracturing. There's also a flowback period where stuff comes up back up the well bore, and then they go into the production phase. And so the production phase, you can see kind of on that right, you're not looking at a pump jack, you're looking at a large site that's got tanks, well heads. It looks like they've got some flaring stacks on this one. And so, yeah, it's a lot larger area, more of an industrial site. So this is a graphic that came from one of my colleagues, Dr. John Adgate. And so we had a group here at the Colorado School of Public Health that really started thinking about, this process in the kind of mid 2000s really started to take off here in Colorado. And around 2014, they started thinking about what are the environmental health impacts of that. So they came up with this graphic in terms of thinking about a risk assessment and all of the components of oil and gas development and what could be affecting the public's health. So you'll see there's a lot of things on here, and that changes from local impacts near the well site, pollutants being produced, noise, all that stuff, to going up to global impacts, where obviously you have climate change from the fossil fuels that are being burned from this process. So there's some exposure studies that have been done. I would say that this is probably an area that's lacking the most. One, there's tens and hundreds of thousands of wells out there, and just being able to capture the pollutants from one is a pretty expensive process to do, and the industry is kind of changing all the time. So a lot of the pushback we get when we present things is, oh, well, you guys probably measured on older wells and we've moved past that now. So like trying to keep up our studies with what's being done at the industry level is difficult. But we do know that lots of hazardous air pollutants are emitted from these sites, and kind of the classic ones are referred to as BTEX, and that's benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylenes. There's other hazardous air pollutants. There's hydrogen sulfide, there's polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that are emitted. A lot of these are carcinogenic. One study said that 11 of the 20 probable and possible human carcinogens are associated with some type of oil and gas activity. And then I think one thing that people really don't consider is the noise and light that's emitted from these sites. So if you're living close to one of these sites, particularly during those drilling and hydraulic fracturing phases, there's going to be a lot of noise that's going to disrupt sleep, that's going to disrupt cardiovascular health. So we're just now kind of really starting to understand kind of that level of stressors on the population that are living around these well sites. This was from a study where we took data that's just north of Denver. So we have the Denver-Julesburg oil and gas basin north of here. And so there's been a lot of work done by University of Colorado at Boulder and going out and measuring pollutants in this patch. And so this is just to show kind of in those particular pollutants, the BTEX, benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylenes, that as you get closer to the closest well site, then these concentrations are going up. One thing I would certainly caution against is the closest well site isn't a great measure, because in this area where they're measuring, I think they have 20 to 30,000 wells. And so if you're going away from one, you're going closer to another. So we just use closest as one measure to kind of show this relationship, but really they're everywhere. It's almost impossible to account for things like wind direction at every given time when that sample is being taken, and all of the other factors that go into it. going back to when these pollutants are being produced. So I mentioned the unconventional, it's kind of got these distinct phases. So the first one is this construction phase where essentially you just have diesel equipment like you would at any construction site clearing the pad. Then they start drilling. So they use typically diesel drill engines, although sometimes they'll use electric engines, which will be less polluting. And they'll start drilling these wells. And once they start drilling, they essentially don't stop until they've drilled the well. And it usually takes a few days to drill a well, but you can imagine if we're talking about 40, 60 wells on a pad, this is a process that now has gone from several days to several months. So that's one of the big stressors of people living around these sites. They also put up sound walls when they do the drilling. But not only do we have noise in the A-weighted scale, which is the noise that you can hear, we also have a lot of noise in the C-weighted scale. And so that's the vibrational noise that you feel. And there's actually not a health-based standard for C-weighted noise, and there's not a lot of work that's been done on C-weighted noise. So we're only beginning to understand how that affects people. But that's one of the biggest complaints from people that are living near these sites is that just the vibrations all the time, the shaking of their windows, they can't sleep at night. They also put up lights when they're doing this drilling to see what they're doing because it's a 24-hour a day process. So you also have that light pollution that's affecting neighbors. The hydraulic fracturing is probably something that people are most familiar with in terms of a term. That's where they put the water and chemicals down the hole to fracture the rocks. And this involves a lot of truck traffic to the site to bring this water and chemicals in, a lot of diesel engines to power the process. And then when they're done fracking that particular well, again, you have kind of this mix of water, chemicals, and oil and gas products coming back up the hole. And so that's typically when we see the highest amount of pollutants during the process. So that's kind of the shorter term production process. But again, if you have a lot of wells, it lasts for a significant amount of time. Production, these wells can usually produce anywhere from a few years up to 30 years, depending on how much they get out of them. But once you have the production, you have truck traffic coming in to take things off site. You have leaks from tanks and valves and things of that nature, and you have a lot of volatile organic compounds that are escaping from these sites. Kind of moving on to a summary of the health effects. So this is a slide I took from one of my colleagues, Dr. Lisa McKenzie, who's done a lot of work in this area that she put together in 2000, I think it was 2023. So some of it's maybe needs to be updated a little bit, but just to show kind of the range of things that we've been looking at in terms of health effects. So these are where we've seen a association between oil and gas and the health effect. Looked at fetal deaths, birth defects, preterm birth, lower respiratory effects like asthma and pneumonia, cancer, and then cardiovascular effects. So this is where we have a decent amount of scientific evidence where we've got multiple studies that are all seeing associations. There's also been 9 studies looking at low birth weights, but these have been kind of inconclusive with mixed results. Some less evidence. So these are studies where we've only had kind of a single group or a single paper on it. So there's not a lot of information yet out there. Are looking at things like headaches and fatigue and sinus symptoms, depression and sleep disorders, cardiological effects, and then I'm not actually sure how to pronounce that one down there at the bottom.
Genitourinary.
There you go. I didn't want to butcher it. So yeah, there's been less information done on that, but it just kind of gives you a range of all of the possible health effects that are being produced from these sites in terms of air pollutants and noise and other stressors. There's been a few studies that have found no association. So just to kind of disclose the information that's out there, the people that have looked at oral clefts, combining all childhood cancers. My colleague Lisa McKenzie didn't find an association with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and then also thyroid cancer. So just to kind of move on to a couple of the big studies that we had worked on that have kind of culminated recently. So one was looking at oil and gas and congenital heart defects. And so we got this information in a table here, and I'll just point you kind of towards the top of it, which is any congenital heart defect. We used kind of the low exposure group as our reference group. And then we saw a 40% increase in our medium exposure group and about a 70% increase in our high exposure group. And kind of what I've done in this is I worked on the model on characterizing those people into low, medium, and high. And we do that based on what they're doing on the well pad in terms of drilling, in terms of hydraulic fracturing, in terms of the amount of produced, and then how many wells are in that area. So Dr. McKenzie is the epidemiologist. So we saw kind of this significant trend, and as you're more exposed, you're more likely to have a congenital heart defect. Kind of the other study, which was just published this year, was looking at acute lymphocytic leukemia around oil and gas here in Colorado. And here I'd point you towards our kind of model 2, which included a bunch of other factors. So other air pollution sources, living near roadways, kind of a lot of other confounders we included in this model. And we see certainly a significant trend in terms of those that are the most highly exposed. We have an over kind of 200% increase in the risk of acute lymphocytic leukemia. The way that we did this, we actually looked at oil and gas wells that were within 10 miles or 16 kilometers, so a pretty wide margin. But we actually varied that. And what we kind of found, if you end up digging into this paper, is those that obviously live closest, so within 5 kilometers, kind of see the biggest effects, but we also see this regional effect. So even people that are in these kind of lower exposed groups, but live in kind of the general facility with a lot of wells around them, that we were also seeing significant associations in terms of ALL with that group as well. And so, sorry, I tried to keep it as brief as I could within the time allotment, but happy to take any questions now or later if we want to save that.
Yeah, thank you. I know you're traveling later, but if it's okay, we'd love to hear from Dr. Gonzalez, and then we'll do questions at the end. So,
okay, great.
But thank you. Awesome overview and terrifying and awesome. David, let me know if you have any trouble sharing.
Yeah.
And welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Ben, it's great to be on a call with you. I've been reading and studying your work for a long time. I am going to talk a little bit about some things that are specific to the California context here. So welcome, clarifying questions as we go along, and I'll try my best to keep an eye on the chat. But yeah, so I've been studying the health impacts of oil and gas predominantly in California. Just want to acknowledge my constellation of collaborators on this work. We have a lot of people that we work with, so I'm here representing various projects involve various combinations of these folks. But one thing I'd like to highlight is I personally view it as a logically difficult to view oil and gas as ever having been a benign industry to have in places where people live, work, and go to school. I think that we are positioned in our policy environment in the US to view oil and gas as, we essentially need to prove harm of industry practices that have already been in place, as opposed to presuming that these may in fact be harmful to begin with. And I think that there's plenty of room now that we have the scientific evidence around emissions of various air pollutants, water pollutants, as well as the noise and other psychosocial stressors that Dr. Allshouse just mentioned, and a growing epidemiological literature on this. But this is a picture from Southern California in the 1920s when the oil industry really picked up in California. There was a major oil boom in Southern California, Los Angeles area around that time. This quote has always stuck with me of these livid towers of flame 100 or more feet high from these oil field fires that happened back then. And today, so this is just thinking about like what this looks like in California. We were hearing Dr. Allshouse and his colleagues work in Colorado. Things in California are similar in that we have a lot of major oil fields near population centers. We don't have fracking in California anymore. But a lot of, and that was actually early on when I started this work, a criticism that was levied by oil industry representatives that, hey, we don't frack here. And when we do, it's cleaner, it's safer. When we do epidemiological studies in California, though, and look at, for example, birth outcomes, I'm going to go off share for just a second because it's not really relevant to the slide. We find similar effect estimates to what we see in other states. And when we think about the different exposure pathways that we just saw, hydraulic fracking or fracturing adds a few different chemicals, particularly in that fracking phase, but other phases of drilling with heavy diesel equipment, potential fugitive emissions of volatile organics from the drill site itself, ongoing activities at these sites, all very similar, regardless of whether you have unconventional hydraulically fractured or conventional drilling, which is predominant in California. And as of a year ago, hydraulic fracturing is now banned in California. But still really matters. Here's what it looks like, a view from a town called Oilsdale in just north of Bakersfield, 100 miles north of LA. This major oil field next to a major population center. In many parts of California, we have oil drilling literally in people's backyards and building, like assembling the evidence. And Dr. McKenzie, who was mentioned, was part of this panel. And I contributed to this report where we looked holistically at all the evidence, applied the Bradford Hill criteria for cause and effect in epidemiology, and concluded with a high level of certainty that the epidemiologic evidence indicates that close living near oil and gas development, specifically oil wells, is associated with advanced adverse perinatal and respiratory health outcomes. So this is the result of years of work and a multidisciplinary panel of researchers. It also goes along with what the oil industry itself knows about the harms of its practices. Back in the 1940s, researchers at a Shell research lab, a Shell oil research lab, were concerned about high rates of cancer among their workers, so occupational health issues. And, they would say that any exposure at all to some of these chemicals would be very dangerous. Some of the ones that were named, including benzene, other of those BTEX chemicals, leading to high rates of environmental cancer among their workers. So obviously there's an occupational hazard, also a hazard for folks that do live very near to these well sites, which is particularly a problem in urban areas in California. Of course, and perhaps in this federal policy environment of science denial, maybe it's less sensible to bring this up, but of course, drilling and producing more oil is going to release more greenhouse gases, which are going to amplify warming, which has a cascade of health impacts. Again, the oil industry was aware of this in the 70s. Their own scientists were making highly accurate predictions about the warming that would be attributable to the use of their products. And something that's been a growing interest of mine is just kind of how things like climate-driven extreme events like wildfires might be going back and impacting existing oil and gas infrastructure. So we looked at this. So I bring this up, and I'm going to go off camera again really briefly, and then I'll keep it quick and open up for questions. BLM land in California tends to be in more remote places. So we have, jurisdictions, land use decision-making in California around oil and gas tends to fall to local, municipalities, if you're in an incorporated city, counties on, non-federal public land in counties. The state has some oversight over the oil industry. In federal lands, it is different, but the federal lands in California tend to be in places that are a little bit more remote. So if I think San Luis Obispo County is my home county, BLM land is, east of the county, like where Kern and San Luis Obispo County meet. Carrizo Plain National Monument, famous for its wildflowers, is one such example. I see, actually one of my very old friends, Herb, is on the call and knows all about this. So really special places that have environmental benefit, but also have potential health impacts at the regional level. So we think about some of these volatile organic compounds that are going to be emitted from oil and gas production are ozone precursor chemicals. Ozone is obviously bad for respiratory health. And if we think about BLM land specifically, a lot of this is in more remote places that do have high wildfire hazard. So if we think, for example, so here's a map. We were curious, in what ways might it be important to think about the future if we're going to be drilling new oil wells? What kind of hazards might that pose for workers, for people that live nearby, and just for, managing this? We found that across the Western US, there's been a lot of areas where there's been wildfires that have gone through oil and gas fields. If we look, this is the Amarillo complex fire in Texas. It burned through over 3,000 oil and gas wells in the burn area. We see this increasing trend since the early 1980s when we first had our wildfire data available from satellites. This trend of increasing number of wells in wildfire burn areas and increasing number of people living near these sites. So it's still relatively rare. There's a lot of people that live in places that have high wildfire hazard that are near population centers. And conversely, like I said, BLM land in California tends not to be near population centers as much, but there is a lot of BLM land in areas that this is data from a group at Argonne National Laboratory, and they went out and they used this tool called the Keach-Byram Drought Index, which is highly predictive of wildfire hazard. Happy to get into it if there's questions about the details here. But these maps are showing areas with moderately high risk of wildfire or high risk of wildfire, high wildfire hazard. You can see by their estimates, most of California is in areas with high wildfire hazard. That doesn't account for some of the aspects of the built environment, like cities, paved cities. But so we're looking at this with the state's data now, and we're finding actually very similar things, very high wildfire hazard in areas where there's existing fossil fuel infrastructure. And this is projected to worsen throughout the century. So if we project this into the future, we think that there's going to be increasing number of oil and gas wells located in wildfire burn areas simply because wildfire hazard is going to grow. And you add more wells on top of that, there's potential for this to amplify this potential hazard. We saw recently, just a few days ago, a major explosion at a refinery, an oil refinery in El Segundo. They have, it's a Chevron facility, they have firefighters on site. Even with that, this was a major disaster with very likely, I don't know if this has been looked at yet, release of very, I would expect, hazardous chemicals into the environment that are going to impact nearby communities. Actually, in my hometown, there's an old, now retired oil refinery in an area that has high wildfire hazard. And other oil and gas infrastructure as well. So when we're drilling wells, we're also going to be drilling other or installing other facilities, which is going to, I think, be relevant. We think about pipelines. Millions of Californians live near pipelines that are used to transport this oil and gas. That the health impacts potentially of emissions from these sites, to my knowledge, has not been investigated. If we think about long-range transport from these more remote places on BLM land, there's going to be facilities like compressor stations, for example, for moving gas around, gathering and processing facilities. We're finding that many of these are also located in areas with high wildfire hazard. And also, a lot of these places with high wildfire hazard have high landslide susceptibility as well. So you can have this, potential nightmare scenario, which we saw a few years ago after the Thomas Fire in Santa Barbara, of a wildfire followed by severe rain event that could destabilize land, potentially causing complications post-disaster. I've been told by authorities with the state that don't worry about this. They're managing, they've got it under control. There's fire departments and they're managing vegetation. We're looking at that now. We're using satellite-based images of vegetation near these fire-threatened fossil fuel infrastructure, and it turns out that is not the case universally. There's many wildfire-threatened oil and gas wells that do have vegetation nearby. So this could complicate things for disaster response and wildfire response, which is something I think we all care about, regardless of where we are. So when I think about points you might want to emphasize for advocacy, I would think about all the health impacts that were mentioned, as well as these potential wildfire-related impacts and other natural disasters that could complicate post-disaster recovery, could have economic impacts, and could have impacts for workers and for first responders. I think that's about it that I had to share today. I just want to show like just an image really quick of what this looks like. Here's a well in the Los Angeles area, so not BLM land, but just here's a well with vegetation relatively nearby. an area with very high fire hazard in, close to people's backyards. You can see this a lot. And over 500,000 Californians are living in these places. So not quite a BLM issue specifically, but something that I think adds to potentially the complications of doing more drilling. We know it's going to drive more wildfires, and we know that that could come back and cause additional harm, in addition to standard operating hazards for folks. I'm happy to take questions, and I'm available if anyone has more questions about any of this stuff.
Well, I'm so grateful for both of you. This came together so well to hear, the different kind of layers of reasons to stop this process. So a huge round of applause to both of you. So we have we have a few minutes if anybody has any questions. Well, applause is blowing up. Yeah, we can definitely open up the floor for a few questions at this point. Yeah, Bill.
Dr. Gonzalez, you mentioned, thank you for the great presentations. You mentioned some of the less obvious spillover effects of increased drilling. The fact that to drill in a remote site is going to require some place to process the oil and gas to transport either by pipeline, rail, or truck that carry with them a whole host of other environmental impacts. Do you anticipate that that's going to be addressed in this environmental impact statement? And if not, as a Californian, are you going to help respond to those aspects of this proposal?
I'm not familiar with the BLM process for this. We were kind of the reason that I looked at the federal lands in the study we published last year is because even under the Inflation Reduction Act, there was going to be in the last administration, there was going to be permits for more drilling on federal lands. So we're really concerned about, and then presuming an industry or an administration that would care about managing environmental hazards, that they might want to minimize potential, future hazards by considering how climate-driven extreme events may threaten these facilities. And then with respect to those sort of ancillary facilities, I don't know to what extent this has been included in the environmental impact statement. I would love to find some time to delve into that and perhaps provide my own comment on that as a Californian and as a scientist that works on this space. That said, the impacts from a health perspective, from an epidemiological perspective, as far as I know, have not been studied, but there's obvious, there are a lot of issues with pipelines. I think there was an analysis from Frac Tracker that found that there was on average, one pipeline related, I think explode, and I don't want to misquote them, but one pipeline related incident on average, like per day over the past few years. So I think claims that the industry has made towards their attention to health and safety, I think are not borne out when we think about the scale of this industry and the magnitude of maintaining these facilities, even post-retirement. And we see a lot of wells that are not monitored, are not well maintained, and could lead to downstream impacts, including fugitive emissions of carcinogenic chemicals, as well as methane and other greenhouse warming gases, and that are also flammable. And there's been instances of some wells in some places having extremely high concentrations of methane nearby in California. So will I comment on this? If I have the time, I would love to. Working dad, don't have the time to do everything that I would love to do, but I will try my best to be providing comment on this. But as a scientist, my research agenda is very focused on trying to understand all the impacts of this industry in the upstream and midstream. And we'll be planning to hopefully create more attention and generate more knowledge on this topic.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot on that, but you may hear from us just to ask some questions if you'd be willing to help us focus a little bit more on those aspects.
Would be happy to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ben, do you want to contribute at all to that question?
Yeah, sorry, I was also looking at the chat. So I think it was talking about the other infrastructure around the oil. Yeah, and one thing I would note here in Colorado, and I'm not sure if it's the same in California, but a lot of times we've heard that local fire departments won't even deal with these oil and gas wells because it's a type of fire that they're really not made to handle. So a lot of times when we see kind of these catastrophic events, kind of the way that they deal with them is they let them burn out until they can be safely dealt with. Obviously, if you're dealing with vegetation and things that can catch fire, that produces a whole other hazard for taking that approach.
That's terrifying, and I could understand. Yeah. Wendy, let's go to your question, and then maybe we'll go back to the chat, or if anybody else.
I'm not sure if our speakers know the answer to this, but I was just thinking about the wildfire risk from the wells in the BLM land, and like who would be responsible for dealing with those wildfires? Is that BLM because it's their property? So then maybe I'm just thinking about like when you're making that argument to them, do they care? So I guess if they have to pay for putting out the fires, then they would care.
I am not aware that I am not aware of anyone that's done an exhaustive search of this. I'm not aware of any fires that have been started due to oil and gas related activities. What we found is that was not part of our analysis. We just looked simply at wildfires that happen to go through oil fields and count the number of wells that were in those oil fields. That said, anytime you have a combination of a high wildfire hazard and sorts of industrial activities that happen, I think that there is, a reason to be concerned, and I think operators do take fire hazard into account when in their management plans. If you read some of their documentation, they do have that consideration as part of their planning. And that's about as much as I know about that. But with respect to responsibility, the way that fire response is divided in California, like where the fire is, and my understanding is that where the fire is initiated. So there's essentially like federal responsibility areas, state responsibility areas, and local responsibility areas across California. And if a fire starts on a federal responsibility area, the federal government will, I think in most cases, be expected to be the lead agency in that response. But they typically, as my understanding, coordinate with state and local authorities so they can leverage all the different powers. For example, like a sheriff's department at county level can like institute institute and enforce an evacuation order in a way that the federal government would not be able to. So I think it's a bit complicated, is my understanding. Maybe folks in the call know more about this than I do, but certainly could be a potential liability that they would want to make sure that they're managing. Rhetorically, is this the best tact to take? I don't know. I don't personally know enough to say.
Yeah. Perhaps we'll just add it to the list of strategies that we bring up. But great question. Yeah. Maybe one or two other questions. I think, did everything in the chat get answered? Oh, yeah, there was the one about, so Ken brought up, what happens to the infrastructure when an oil well is decommissioned? Hot topic. And I thought since we have our another ally here, Woody Hastings from the Climate Center, which is one of the groups that we collaborate a lot with. Woody, if you want to speak to that at all?
I'm sorry, Ashley, what was the question?
So Ken asked, what happens to the infrastructure when an oil well is decommissioned?
Yeah, well, that's yeah, a huge question, and it could take quite a bit of time to talk about that. I mean, a big problem is abandonment, and oil companies really abdicating their responsibility to clean up. So there's huge efforts underway to and legislation that's been passed to ensure adequate bonding for oil well cleanup. And then to complicate things even more, the legislation just passed this session by Senator Limon to consider to get a plan going to look at repurposing spent oil wells, that infrastructure, those deep bores in the earth, to use them for gravity storage. So there's potential for reusing those for other purposes, but the immediate need, especially due to methane leaks and other hazards of having that infrastructure to not be remediated, not be plugged, all that. There's a more immediate need to protect public health and the environment, to address those kinds of remediation questions before we really look at, oh, gee, let's use them for another purpose, because there's probably lots of, unforeseen problems with that if you're using something that was previously used for oil and gas extraction. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Yeah, Climate Help Now Action Fund was a big part of working on legislation last year. And the shorthand, I'm a medical doctor, not a PhD doctor, but the shorthand is that most wells, if they're not properly, so there's like properly capped, then they are leaking many of those chemicals that that Ben mentioned earlier. And those have very real local health impacts. So, and it costs a ton of money. That's something like $50,000 to $100,000 to properly cap wells so that they don't continue leaking. So, if a company owns a well but doesn't have the money to properly cap, or they don't decide to spend the money to properly cap them, then the community is left bearing the brunt of yet another kind of corporate departure. So that is a really important question. And another reason why we need no more wells, because we can't afford to clean them all up, even the ones we have already, and it's landing on the taxpayers. Bill, maybe we'll take your question and then we might move towards closing.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the same thread we're discussing. So the problem of managing idle and orphan wells has been a huge problem in California. The oil and gas industry frequently keeps saying these are still active wells if they're produced just a couple barrels of oil a day, which is basically part of the definition of an idle well, but they say they don't have to cap them. They're proposing all these things like storing carbon in these wells so they don't have to cap them. And then they also frequently sell their idle wells to these shell corporations and then go bankrupt and say, well, we don't have money to do this. Plus, the state also is not enforcing the very laws that are on the books to require the industry to cap these wells. So that has been a problem in California, continues to be a problem in California, and increasing oil and gas drilling is only going to exacerbate that problem. So that is a huge part of the issue.
We estimate that abandoned oil wells is the most common exposure for people in California. So currently, there's about 900,000 people in California live within 1 kilometer, 3,200 feet of an active oil well. About 3 million live within 1 kilometer of an inactive oil well, which includes wells that have been idle or in wells that have been idle for a long time and not plugged. Almost 3.6 million people live near an abandoned oil well in California. I haven't looked at, so there's a lot of people live kind of near both or all three of those types of classes of wells, but that is by far the most common exposure. Been very little health work on that. We're trying to fill that gap in. But some of these wells, and we have an industry that started here in, Chevron started in the 1890s. Like there will be blood. Like this has been an industry here for a long time. And the regulations for how to properly plug a well have evolved quite a bit over that time. So there are wells that are older that are still there. We're a seismically active state. There's some researchers, I believe University of Toronto, Mary Kang, has been looking at how can we predict where there's going to be methane emissions from leaking wells. It's an active area of research right now. I would love to be in conversation with anyone that's thinking about this in California.
Whew. So thank you again so much. The case is very convincing of all the reasons why more drilling, especially on our public lands, is a terrible idea. So we're going to transition. Yeah, very scary. So let's channel that energy into directly taking action together. And I'll pass it to you, Allie.
Hello. All right, so make sure the slide's up. Okay, cool. So now I'm just going to cover, okay, well, what can you do about the issue? So quickly going back to what Bill was saying at the beginning of the call, the draft environmental impact statement is going to come out October 24th, and the period for public comment will begin that same day and last until January. So what we want to do is ask you to join us. We're all going to get together on November 20th at 12:30 on Zoom, and we're going to go over exactly how to give public comment on this issue. And let me put it in the chat. And so we'll specifically be commenting on the draft environmental impact statement, and the goal is to ensure that BLM does not open more public lands for oil and gas drilling. So we want to do this together so it'll make the process easier and we can address any questions that come up in real time. We also want to talk a bit more maybe about strategy or talking points based on the two fantastic presentations that we just heard today. So for this, we urge everyone to show up if you can, since this action we think will be particularly important and also visible. And as a bonus, it seems like submitting a comment is relatively easy. So we'll just be discussing strategy for that. So to get an idea of how many people might be interested in attending, can you raise your hand if you're available?
Yeah, Ken's with us.
Or thumbs up, either
Yay.
one.
Yeah, and we'll take action together, submitting comments during that meeting, and we'll have templates to help. Awesome! Yay!
Okay, great.
Good
So
company.
yeah, the link is in the chat. We're also going to send it out through email. So then you'll receive it that way. And we don't have a date yet, but Ashley was saying this earlier that we're expecting BLM will also hold in-person meetings. And that would be great because we would love to organize some sort of in-person rally, and we can make a large showing to show up and make sure that they know this is an issue many of us care about and are willing to take some action on and show up for. So also lastly, Ashley, Bill, and I have been meeting regularly to figure out this process, how to intervene, and also plan events around stopping oil and gas drilling on our public lands. So if you're interested in being involved and part of this little team that we have, please let us know. And Ashley's email is on the slide. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to her for some final announcements and to close.
Perfect. Thank you, Allie. Is somebody's hand up because they want to join us? Ken, you're interested in helping us plan these events? Yes. Wonderful. That's great. Many more hands make lighter work. So we're excited to have Ken and anybody else who wants to join come with us because this is important. And I think I just want to name like a lot of really wonderful organizations and people in California who like taught us about this BLM process happening and stopping more oil and gas drilling and transitioning to clean energy. There's so many challenges right now that we're kind of spread thin. So I think the more people who can join in to help, the better, because there's so many fronts of the struggle that we could use more people. So would love to have you. And then just to finish up, we wanted to close out sharing some of the opportunities to join us and be a part of the Climate Health Now community. So right now, this is a little bit to the side, but because healthcare itself contributes something like 8 to 10% of US greenhouse gases, one of the 3 key areas that Climate Health Now works on is healthcare sustainability and decarbonizing the healthcare sector itself. So Bill is one of the coaches, and then Pam Lee also is a coach for Climate Health Now's Sustainability Fellowship, which is a year-long fellowship to make a change towards sustainability, lowering carbon, reducing waste in healthcare workplaces. So we're accepting applications for next year for the next couple of weeks, and please share this with anybody you think would be interested. And then there's a documentary called The Week that has 3 different parts that's designed to be watched in community, even virtually. And the first one is about kind of the situation we're in terms of how bad climate change and global warming are, followed by a conversation. So the second one is kind of what different people are doing about it, and then how to take action together. So people who watch it say it's really valuable and meaningful, especially to watch in community. And again, each section is followed by a 30-minute conversation. So it's not, it's really about kind of building relationships and trying to figure out how to respond together. So we're offering that thanks to CHN's Culture Club this month in 3 different Thursdays. So if that interests you, maybe Whitney, how would you recommend people let us know if they want to be a part of it? Or is there a registration link?
Oh yeah, I put it in the chat for the week.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Great. And then if you're kind of new or has been a while since you were part of Climate Health Now, we'd love you to join our new member welcome, which is November 13th, to learn kind of an overview of all of Climate Health Now's work. And then lastly, please, if everybody could come to our meeting on November 20th, just before the holidays take over our lives, to take action together in contributing some of the science that we heard about today from our awesome speakers. We would love you to join us. And if you just register now, we'll put it on your calendar. You don't have to worry about it. So the link is in the chat, and that'll be a Thursday in about a month or 5 weeks or so. So I think that's it. Really, really glad that you joined us. And thank you so much again to David and Ben. We really appreciate your work and expertise and teaching us. And we hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Take care.